James here, and welcome to module 3 of this online training here in the Expert Empires community, all about how you can promote, fill, maximise the profit opportunity from hosting your own live events, seminars, workshops, conferences, whatever it is you fancy doing. So the topic for today is how big is big? In other words, how big should you be looking to go with your events? Because it's commonly said from stage at events or from quote unquote gurus that, you need to play a big game, and if you build it, they will come. And I'm down with that. I am absolutely all for the philosophy of playing a bigger game. I talk about it a lot in my events myself. But I guess the question really is, how big is big for you? And really, from my point of view, I would strongly encourage anybody to play a bigger game. Anybody, no matter where you are, I strive constantly to play a bigger and bigger game. But make that relative to where you are right now. Because, like, when I first started, my first ever event, the Copywriting Academy, back in 2009, a big game for me back then was running the event in the first place. I'd never hosted an event of my own. So a big game to me was just running the event and having people there. I had, personally, 8 people at my first ever event. It was called the Copywriting Academy. It was a 4-day training. People paid $2,000 a ticket to attend. And I got 8 people there, which, is no great shakes now in the huge scheme of things. But back then, when I was making 50, 60, 70, 80 grand a year as a freelance copywriter, 8 people at $2,000 a ticket, £16,000 in August 2009 was a lot of money to me. In fact, it was more money than I could have made just selling my time for money, which is what I was doing before. So really, I think you've got to look at playing a bigger game relative to where you are now. When I first started this company, which has been established just over 3 years, playing a big game then for our first event was 100 people. And so we aimed for 100 people at our first ever Bums on Seats bootcamp, which was around about 3 years ago. I think it'd be 3 years in October we ran that first event. And we got a shade over 100 people to attend, and it was a huge success. And that to me then was a big game relative to where I was, new business, starting from scratch again, effectively. When I look now, we're running Expert Empires a couple of times a year. In 2017, I'd not done an event like that before, not in this company at least. And, a big game then was, how can we get 500 people to attend the first ever Expert Empires event? We managed to sell 635 tickets in the end to that event. So I really think it's important for you to play a bigger game. I'm absolutely all in on that. You should always be striving constantly to push the boundaries and play a bigger game, but do it relative to where you are now. Ranjit, hey Ranjit, thanks for the comment. So Ranjit's question is, 10x, of course, many of you know me because you attended Expert Empires with Grant Cardone just back in May. So is 10xing a good start? Is Ranjit's question. Now, this is where I probably have a slightly different view to Mr. Cardone. When I'm talking about your business as a whole, I think having the ambition to 10x it is brilliant. I think you should have it. I think it's great to have the mindset of not just how can we grow a little bit at a time, but how can we 10x this thing. I think when it comes to events, the 10x mentality is risky if you don't know what you're doing. Let's say you've never run an event before. Well, I suppose if you've never run one before, then you can't 10x nothing. It's still nothing. But let's say you never run an event before and you went, right, first event, I want to play a big game. I want to get 1,000 people to attend. Good luck to you. I am never going to say to anybody that they can't do something. My little boy is 9 years of age. He wants to be a professional footballer. You will never hear me tell him that he can't become a professional footballer. I encourage him. I support him. I give him everything he could possibly need to succeed. The odds are stacked against him heavily. But I'm never going to tell him he can't. I'm never going to tell you you can't, Ranjit, do an event with 1,000 people if that's what you want to do. What I will tell you is that the bigger you go without experience, the more risky it becomes. And so if somebody was coming to me, I'm not saying you are, Angie, but if somebody came to me and said, Nick, first ever event, I want to put 1,000 people in the room, and you know, I've got my last 50 grand to make it happen, I would politely try and encourage that person to maybe play a big game relative to where they are now with their last 50 grand in the world and go, let's look at how we can do your first event as a test with 100 in the room. You're not going to have to spend all your cash, and then providing it works and the numbers make sense, then we can scale it gradually. I'm not saying you can't. I'm never going to tell anybody they can't. I'm not saying you can't do 1,000 people first time out the gate. What I'm telling you is I've been in this industry for 10 years plus, and I've seen so many people that have tried to go too big too soon and failed and therefore disappeared from the market, and their reputation is affected negatively as well. So my philosophy would be, think big relative to where you are now. And by the way, Sam, thanks for your comment. You only want to think big. Great, so do I, relative to where I am now. So when I'm thinking big 5 years down the line, if I told you where I'm thinking 5 years down the line in terms of growth of our business, you would be staggered with how big I'm thinking. However, in the next 12 months, I'm thinking big relative to where we are now, especially when it comes to events. I'm thinking big relative to what we've achieved in the past. I'm not thinking ridiculously big, because it would be foolish for me right now, as we sit here today, to attempt to run an event for 5,000 people. These events happen. So, you know, I attend Ryan Dice's Traffic and Conversion Summit every year in the States, have done for the last few years. He had nearly 7,000 people at his last event. But guess what? Traffic and Conversion Summit, I think they're on their 10th year, 9th year, something like that. It's been going 8, 9, 10 years, something like that. The first ever Traffic and Conversion Summit had 200 or 300 people in the room. So start thinking big relative to where you are now, and from there you can grow. And by the way, once you get started, the numbers go up fairly quickly. So, you know, I told you we had 8 people at our first ever event. And in fact, 3 years ago, we were only getting 100 people a time in the room. And at our last event, Expert Empires, in May 2018, we sold 851 tickets. So we've 8x'd our numbers in terms of bums on seats in 3 years, which isn't bad going. And we've managed to do it in a way that's sustainable, healthy, I would say risk-free, but let's say relatively low risk, which to me is the smart way of doing it. I'm never going to tell you you can't do something, but I would always encourage you to think big relative to where you are now, and so you reduce the risk of things going wrong. So, question of the day for module 3, how big is big? Question of the day is, what does big mean to you today? As you sit here, 1st of August 2018, what does big mean to you in particular? Please post in the comments and tell me, what does big mean to you? What events have you got coming up? I've seen a few people post in the group, new members that have come in and said, this is perfect timing because I've got an event in September or I've got an event in November. Great. Tell me, what does big for your event in September or November mean to you today? What would be big but not silly big, so that it borders on risky or silly? So what does big mean to you today? If you've never done an event before, if you've never run a seminar or workshop, what would an achievement be that you'd be proud of? What would big mean to you in the next 3 months? Because I really believe that pretty much any event can be pulled off in a 3-month period, no matter how big or small. I mean, you know, I wouldn't suggest you attempt this, by the way. It was very stressful, but one of the biggest events I've ever run, this was probably 2014, I think, so about 4 years ago, and we had 7 weeks, and we got it was just under 500 people in the room, generated multiple hundreds of thousands of pounds in sales, and we did it in 7 weeks from idea to execution and actually running the event. I wouldn't suggest you do it that quickly, but I think doing an event in the next 90 days is absolutely achievable for anybody in this group. So the question of the day, what does big mean to you today? Please post in the comments. Quick announcement before we wrap up today's training. What we've done to organise the training, make it easy to access for you, I say we, what Veronica's done, I just take a bit of the credit, is that she's organising and has organised the first couple of modules so that they're easy to access for you. You can get them all in one place. So if you're watching on the Facebook app on your phone, when you go into the Expert Empires community, there's a scroll across the top that moves from left to right, and the units section, if you click on that, is where you'll find all of these modules that are being posted on a daily basis. If you're on desktop, it's on the menu that runs along the left-hand side of the Expert Empires community. So you can look at all, well, the previous 2 units or the previous 2 modules under that units section, and of course we'll be adding this one and all of the subsequent trainings that are going to be in there for the next few weeks. We'll be going into that units section so they're nice and easy for you to access. So thanks for tuning in again today. It's been a pleasure as always. Question of the day: what does big mean to you in particular today? When you think about your next event or your first event in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, however far in the future it is, what would big be relative to where you are right now? Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.